So, Michael, there has been renewed pressure on Donald Trump over the Epstein files because of the release of a series of emails last week. So, can you just break that down for us? What happened?
So this started early last week. Well, actually, it was midway through last week. It feels like longer ago, but it was Wednesday here in the US. The day that the very long, record long government shutdown was poised to end. So, a big enough event as it is. Over the top of that, the Democrats, who are on what's called the House of Representatives Oversight Committee, decided to do something. Now, that committee has basically been, they have subpoenaed a bunch of records from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So these are not the full, what you would call Epstein files, but they are a lot of documents. And what the Democrats have been doing is they've been selectively releasing, drip feeding out little bits of these files that obviously incriminate or purport to incriminate the president Donald Trump. And on Wednesday, as the government shutdown's about to end, which is theoretically a good news story for the president, the Democrats released three emails from an 8-year period, and they at first blush at least would seem to suggest that Donald Trump has more questions to answer about his association with Jeffrey Epstein and what he knew about Jeffrey Epstein's activities back at the time.
Let's walk through the emails one by one. So, tell us about the first of those emails. And can you give us a bit of context, I guess, about what was happening at the time that it was sent?
Yeah, so the first email is from April 2011, and it's an exchange between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime associate, at one point his girlfriend, and of course the woman who, in only a few years ago, was sent to jail for aiding and abetting and participating in this sex trafficking ring. She was the only person convicted in the Epstein sex trafficking ring, because of course Jeffrey Epstein died in jail awaiting trial. So it's 2011, obviously long before Donald Trump even runs for the presidency. At this point, he's a businessman, he's a reality TV star on The Apprentice, and Epstein says to Maxwell in this email, "I want you to realize that that dog that hasn't barked is Trump." And then it says, redacted name, spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned. Then it goes on to say, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. And to that email, Ghislaine Maxwell responds, I have been thinking about that, quote unquote. So, look, it's tough to know exactly what to make of this email. So this is after Jeffrey Epstein has been convicted and served his sentence for soliciting a minor for prostitution. This is, if you know your Epstein saga, you know that he did a plea deal in 2008 in Florida that basically saw him serve I think it was sort of a jail sentence, but he was mostly out on work release. It was generally seen as quite a favourable plea deal. So this is after this has all happened, and I think the key part of that email is where he's saying that Trump is the dog that hasn't barked. Now, I'm not going to say that I know what that means, but I suppose he could be suggesting that Trump had not gone to the authorities, had not ratted on him in some way. I would only be guessing. But it's certainly seems to indicate that, Jeffrey Epstein thought that Donald Trump had a level of knowledge about something.
And with regards to that email, the name that had been redacted was actually the name of a victim of Epstein's that we now know was Virginia Giuffre.
Yes, so the Republicans have identified this person as, Virginia Jeffrey. They came out straight away and said that. And when you first read this email, you think, oh dear, like someone has spent hours at Jeffrey Epstein's house with Donald Trump, and it's purported to be a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. So that looks very bad for Donald Trump. The saving grace of that for the president is that Virginia Jeffrey has been on record, and under oath, in fact, saying that Donald Trump never acted untoward toward her, and I think that she never had intercourse with Donald Trump. So, whatever Jeffrey Epstein is alluding to there about spending hours together at his house, it seems like that is unlikely to be anything untoward, because Virginia Jeffrey has been quite clear about that, and she has not been shy about making accusations against other people. She is, of course, one of the first and most prominent Epstein accusers, was the accuser of Prince Andrew. So, for her to have said on the record that Donald Trump did nothing, I think we have to consider that pretty strongly.
Absolutely. And so tell us about the next email. I'm talking here about the one that appears to have been sent in December 2015.
So this is an email that Jeffrey Epstein, an email exchange between Jeffrey Epstein and the high-profile journalist Michael Wolff. And Michael Wolff is someone that has been, I guess you might say, courting Jeffrey Epstein for a long time. It's sort of what he does. He chronicles and he writes about these sort of high society elite people. So in this case, it's December 2015. Donald Trump is running for president. It's just ahead of the one of the Republican primary debates, where Donald Trump will be facing off on CNN against other contenders for the Republican nomination. And Michael Wolff says to Jeffrey Epstein that he hears CNN is going to ask Trump about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein during this debate. And Jeffrey Epstein says, well, if we were to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be? That's a direct quote. And Wolff then goes on to say, I think you should let Trump hang himself. If he says that he hasn't been on your plane or to your house, quote, that gives you a valuable PR and political currency. Wolff goes on to say you can hang him in a way that potentially generates a positive benefit for you. Or, if it really looks like he could win, you could save him, generating a debt. So, look, I mean, there's many things you could say about this. What it clearly shows is, how close Epstein and Michael Wolff were, to the point where, Michael Wolff is kind of giving him the heads up about this possible question, and then Jeffrey Epstein, in a seemingly sympathetic way, says, if we could craft an answer for him, what would it be? And Wolff goes on to give him some media advice, and it's not the only email of that nature where Michael Wolff seems to be giving media or public relations advice to Jeffrey Epstein. I guess the other element, obviously, is where Michael Wolff seems to suggest that Donald Trump would not be telling the truth if he said that he hadn't been to Jeffrey Epstein's house or hadn't been on the plane. And of course, we've seen logs that do suggest that Donald Trump has been on the plane multiple times. But again, he's always denied any wrongdoing. He's always denied any knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crime. So we should make that clear.
Okay, and then the third and final email, this one was written in early 2019, and this was from Jeffrey Epstein to Michael Wolff, again, that seasoned journalist, several months before Epstein was arrested for the final time. So tell us about this one.
So this email from Jeffrey Epstein to Michael Wolff makes reference to the Mar-a-Lago, which is Donald Trump's private club in Florida, where, of course, Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump used to hang out a lot. Some conjecture as to whether Jeffrey Epstein was ever an actual member, but he certainly spent a lot of time there. And in this email, Jeffrey Epstein says, quote, Trump said he asked me to resign, never a member ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Elaine to stop. Unquote. So, look, this is another interesting email. Obviously, the key words in there, he knew about the girls, is the one that generated a lot of headlines, because, again, it seems to be Jeffrey Epstein suggesting that Donald Trump had, a lot of contemporaneous knowledge about what was happening with these underage girls. But, look, I mean, the way that you probably would read that, or perhaps the preferred reading of that, certainly the way that Donald Trump would explain it, is that Donald Trump says that he became aware that Jeffrey Epstein was stealing, to use Donald Trump's words, or taking, to use Donald Trump's words, staff members from the Mar-a-Lago for his own sort of purposes, basically poaching staff from Donald Trump's business to Jeffrey Epstein's business. And Trump says, he didn't know what business that was, but he didn't like that Jeffrey Epstein was coming down to Mar-a-Lago and taking young women, staff members, whether it be from the spa at the Mar-a-Lago or from somewhere else. So Donald Trump would probably say to that email, well, yeah, I've already said publicly that I knew he was stealing staff, and that's what that phrase, he knew about the girls, refers to. But of course, other people are saying, well, we need a more fulsome explanation. We need a proper explanation of what Jeffrey Epstein was getting out there and what exactly Trump did know.
And so, I guess collectively, what's your read about these exchanges we've been talking about? Jeffrey Epstein saying that Donald Trump is the dog that hasn't barked, and then his comment, of course he knew about the girls. What is Epstein saying really here? And do you think he was meaning to say something in particular?
Look, I think it adds to the sense that already existed that Donald Trump has more that he needs to say and more questions to answer about his association with Jeffrey Epstein. But it's certainly not a smoking gun. And it's certainly not something that, you can look at and say, aha, the prosecutors, investigators need to be put on to Donald Trump because, it looks like he's engaged in some sort of illegal activity. We don't have that. Now, I don't know what else. We've seen 20,000 pages of emails now, thanks to the Republicans. And again, there's still doesn't seem to be anything in those many reams of documents that would suggest Donald Trump has done anything illegal. But, as we knew before, he was close to this man. A lot of people were. We know what Donald Trump has said about women in the past. We know he was a man who enjoyed the company of beautiful women, and as he would say. And so, look, I think it's uneasy, it's uncomfortable reading. It's these are private emails that no one ever thought would see the light of day, and so again, in that sense, it's fallacious. But I don't know if there's a smoking gun here. What it does do is give more ammunition to the people who are saying, well, we need to release the full Epstein files. We need to make them public. Everyone needs to see who knew what, and if there's then any cause for further prosecutions or investigations, then that can take place. But I think, it may not be a hammer blow, but it does add to the case for more transparency and the release of the files.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you, which is how Donald Trump has responded. So can you tell us what, other than that, has he said?
So look, it was interesting because he was quiet for a couple of days. Well, he did public events, but he didn't take any questions, which was unusual. But look, he has since taken questions from journalists. He spent the weekend in Florida and took questions on the plane on the way down. Basically, repeating his old line that, this is a Democratic hoax. And I guess when he says that, he's implying that the bits targeting him are the hoax, not the entire Epstein story, because he's now decided that after many months of saying there's nothing to this Epstein business and we should all forget about it, he's now saying, actually, we're going to get the Justice Department to investigate this. So he's directed his Attorney General to open an investigation, a Department of Justice and FBI investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's links to Bill Clinton, to Larry Summers, to other high-profile Democratic people who appear in those emails. That has already begun, it seems. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has said that she's appointed Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in New York, to take the lead on this case. So it seems like that is now underway, and there will be a probe into specifically Jeffrey Epstein's links to Democrats, which, is, there are many unusual and alarming things about that. Firstly, that, a president would direct the Attorney General to open an investigation of this nature. Traditionally, the president takes a hands-off approach to the Justice Department. Now, we know this president doesn't do that. In fact, he's already lent on Pam Bondi to hurry up with prosecutions of his political enemies. So it's not new in that sense, but it is, again, just kind of remarkable in a sense. And then secondly, that we would have an investigation specifically into someone's links with people from a particular political party. But that's the time that we live in. If the Justice Department hadn't been politicized before, it certainly has been now.
And so, Michael, what are the next steps here? Like, what happens from now?
Well, look, probably the next big step is to see what happens in the House of Representatives as soon as this week, when there will be a vote on a bill to compel the release of the full Epstein files. So the Republicans basically, because the government was shut down, a new Democratic member of Congress was not sort of admitted into the House for quite some time. She was admitted as soon as the government opened up again. She cast she was the crucial addition to a petition that essentially will now allow this bill to come to a vote, and it's, I think, expected that vote will pass the House of Representatives. Now, that does not necessarily mean anything because that bill would then have to go to the Senate. It's possible that enough Republicans will get on board. We know that there are a lot of Republicans out there who want these files to be released, so we'll have to see then what happens in the Senate. If it passes, it would then have to go to the desk of the president, who would have to agree to releasing the Epstein files. Look, that would be fascinating, and I think you've seen how intent the White House is on not letting this get that far, because they tried very hard to not let this bill come on in the House of Representatives. They have been heavying Republicans to take their name off this petition. People like Lauren Boebert, who was summoned into the White House, into the Situation Room, no less, usually, for national security emergencies. But she was there, and basically they tried to convince her to take her name off this petition. It didn't work. Nancy Mace, another Republican congresswoman who was urged by the administration to take her name off this, she hasn't done that either. So they don't want it to come to a vote. That is very evident, and we'll see what happens. But it's an interesting time for Trump's relationship with the broader Republican Party in the Congress.
I mean, it sure is. And do you think there's any chance that this actually could do some damage to Trump? And can we actually have any faith that the contents of the Epstein files will actually be investigated properly? Because, of course, Trump has managed to wield power, or at least great sway, over various branches of government that are meant to be independent from the president, like the Supreme Court and, of course, the Department of Justice, which has agreed under his demand, as we've said, to prosecute some of his political foes and critics. So what do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I don't think you could have any confidence that there would be a proper investigation under this FBI and this Justice Department. Although, look, it's hard to predict because, again, there could be something in the files that is, a smoking gun that blows it wide open, and if that was to somehow be released, then that would probably change the whole nature. At the moment, we're kind of, guessing, and we think, it looks bad, he has questions to answer, there might be something in there. But if something like that was to become public, then that would probably change the dynamics. But yeah, under this Department of Justice, where people who aren't on board with the president are purged and sacked, you couldn't really be confident that it would be subject to a proper investigation, I don't think.
Wow, incredible times, Michael. We're so lucky to have you there in Washington reporting on it. So thank you so much for your time.
No problem.